Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here at Wear Yellow Proudly. First of all, we'd like to wish all of you good health and safety. Secondly, we'd like to thank you so much for volunteering your time. We are linking all of your media in the description. To our audience and community, please consider supporting our panelists or the organizations they support. Lastly, we'd like to give a content warning to our audience. During this panel, we will be discussing racism, brutality, systemic violence, and other extremely difficult topics. We'll try to stop short of descriptions of the actual harm or murder, since I'm sure that that will be too difficult even for many of us to share or to hear. Which brings me to the stated goal of this panel: to foster meaningful discussion between Asian communities and Black communities about ways in which Asian communities can empower, support, and stand in solidarity with Black communities today, tomorrow, for the rest of our lives, and continuing past our lifetimes. Your personal advice, your professional advice, resources that we can discuss and link in the description, organizations to donate to, and more. We do not wish to in any way sweep under the rug or ignore the hundreds and thousands of years of horizontal racism, colorism, and discrimination that has gone on between our communities. Unfortunately, we don't have a historian here today who can discuss that. We are looking to interview a Black and Asian historian in the near future. It might be difficult for our Asian audience to hear about the anti-Blackness baked into Asian and particularly East Asian cultures. All of our Asian panelists are open to discussing these issues. Hopefully, we can use our knowledge of history and our own narratives to provide our audience with practical things they can do to contribute to Asian Black solidarity going forward. Of course, our main audience is Asian Pacific Islander people, but we'd also love for non-Asian, non-Black people of color, as well as white people, to be able to learn from this panel as well. Okay, now let me give each of our panelists a brief introduction. Panelists, if you don't mind, after your intro, could you please unmute and share with us your general whereabouts in the world and how you and your loved ones are doing health and safety-wise. Beginning alphabetically with Jeremy Chan. Jeremy is a pianist who most recently completed the Vocal Arts Piano Fellowship at the Juilliard School. His writing on Asian representation in opera was recently published in the Opera America magazine. During the lockdown, he started a new Instagram channel, Nangman Pianist, dedicated to K-drama/love song piano covers. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hello, I'm in New York City, and my loved one, my whole family's in Australia, and I have a sister. She's in Boston, so everyone's doing well. My parents are just retired, so
wow, that's awesome.
They're having a good time.
Great to hear. Great to hear. Okay, next we have Leah Hawkins. Leah Hawkins, soprano, very recently completed the Lindemann Young Artist Development Program at the Metropolitan Opera, and is also an alumna of the K-Fritz Young Artist Program at Washington National Opera. Also, I want to add an addendum that I literally fell out of my seat when she sang a high D at the end of the Strawberry Call in Porgy and Bess at the Met last August. Maroe Kalia Adib can attest she was sitting behind me. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you, Jesse. I am currently in Philadelphia, where I'm from, with my family, and everyone here is okay. My mother was just tested for COVID because she is an RN, and she hasn't been feeling very well.
Oh, no.
She doesn't have the normal symptoms of COVID, but her doctor wanted her to get tested just to be safe. So we're waiting, I think, today or tomorrow to find out.
Wow. Best wishes to her. Please let us know what the results are, and also tell her thank you for her important work, especially as a Black woman being affected much at a higher rate than others. That's absolutely amazing. Yeah. Okay, next we have Carami, or Mimi Hilaire. Mimi Hilaire is a singer who graduated from Mannes College and is slated to sing Lady Macbeth with Knoxville Opera in the coming year. She also performs with a jazz band called Mimi and the Pod Brothers. Welcome, Mimi.
Hi, thank you. So happy to be here. I'm here in Queens, New York, where I'm from, with my family, quarantining with my mom. My mom's also an RN.
Wow.
Yeah, she hasn't been sick. She was tested. She doesn't have the antibodies. So somehow, we're Haitian, so I feel like something about that, the strong genes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kidding. That's not real. but we're all fine.
That's
and,
good. Really glad
we're all
to hear.
doing well. Thank you.
Best wishes to her as well, and thank you for the important work that she's doing. Okay, next we have Ling Ling Huang. Ling Ling is a freelance violinist and writer currently living in Brooklyn, New York. So Ling Ling, welcome.
Hello, lovely to be here with all of you. I'm in Brooklyn right now. It's super rainy, which is making my screen really dark. But my parents are safe and doing as well as they can in Houston, where I'm from. And I had a new niece born last week.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so I'm staying in New York so that I can kind of visit and help out when I can there in Westchester.
Okay, and our final panelist, Morgan J. Smart. Morgan J. Smart is a librettist, singer, songwriter, dramaturg, and lover of story, of love, and of light. A graduate of NYU's Graduate Musical Theater Writing Program, Morgan is passionate about writing stories of ancestral magic, Black love, and matriarchy. Welcome, Morgan.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here as well. I actually vacated New York City. I live in Brooklyn and came to a suburb to the west of Atlanta area where my mom is. So I am quarantined here with some family and we're doing pretty well. Aside from Atlanta being pretty much completely open, and that's a little terrifying. But staying in our little bubble for now.
That's good. Morgan, I'd like to start with you because you are actually of Chinese and Jamaican descent. And so I think you have a particularly unique perspective in this conversation. Could you speak to your personal experience as a mixed Black and Asian person? How has your experience been different in Asian spaces versus Black spaces? Have you ever faced discrimination from one community or the other? Have you been called out? Have you been called not Asian enough by an Asian person or not Black enough by a Black person? And what about in your work or in the theater industry as a whole?
Yeah, so obviously I've never really presented as an Asian person. My grandmother on my father's side is, her father's Chinese. So there was a big migration from China to Jamaica. And so there is a large community of Chinese Jamaican people, and there's a big concentration of them in South Florida. So that's kind of where my family is. And I lived there for a while, went to undergrad in Miami to spend some time with that family. And I had been visiting them from being a child. So I would say there is a big difference in that side of my family versus my American Black family. And there wasn't a lot of discussion about it growing up. I think because the Chinese Jamaican community, a lot of them came directly from Jamaica when they came to the US. So Jamaica, the majority of people there are Black, but their experience is a lot different from Black Americans. So my understanding of someone who looks Chinese coming into the US, their experience with American Black people is a lot different from their experience with Jamaican Black people. So with that, I did encounter some, anti-Blackness. It does exist in all of the communities here in the US. And I think that a lot of the people who came into the US from the Caribbean, they are participants in anti-Blackness here. I did hear some, even family members back when police violence has been happening and, what's happening then. I did hear some family members comment on that issue saying that, why aren't Black people cooperating with the police? Why aren't they, doing these certain things? And that really, really hurt me because I would never hear that on the other side of my family.
So your Jamaican, your Chinese Jamaican family members said could you clarify?
Yeah, I did hear that from those. Yeah, so
wow.
Yeah, it that was really hard for me, and that was at a point where I felt pretty disconnected from that community. And not really in a position where I could teach or where I wanted to teach.
Sure.
Not
your job.
not my job exactly. So I did experience that, and I think there's a lot of learning that the community has to do. But at the same time, I feel, I love those people in my life, and I love that part of myself. And but it did create a lot of conflict and identity growing up. Being a person of mixed heritage, that's something that is kind of glorified here in this country. So as a kid, I leaned towards identifying as mixed for a while, especially in those like middle school years. You're really impressionable, and a lot of people are asking you, what are you as a light-skinned person? So it felt easier for me to say mixed, but when I say mixed as a person who looks like me, people think, oh, you're white and black automatically.
Yep.
So for a while, it was easy just to say, yeah, that is what it is, and move on from there. And then when I got into college is when I really understood that was anti-Black in myself, and that internal racism and hatred and those things I had to work through. So that all, was a part of my learning about my identity and how to present as myself and, be authentic. And so in the writing community and in my work, I haven't really experienced any issue with how I identify or being a mixed race person and being Asian. That hasn't really come up in a lot of my work. I primarily write about being a Black person, being a Black woman, and telling the stories of the Black women in my family. But I am starting to write in that direction, to talk about being mixed and to talk about the Asian ancestry that I have in my family. So that's something new for me that I'm still exploring, but it's very interesting.
Have you ever experienced a Black person, and I guess in particular in your writing, because you write about Black issues, saying, oh, you're not Black enough because you're light-skinned, you're mixed? Have you ever encountered that?
Absolutely. Yes, I've experienced that. A lot of people want to prescribe identity onto you as a Black person in general. I think especially as a mixed Black person, because, a lot of people who aren't minorities, it seems like they want a way in, a way to understand, a way to relate. And so that translates as how close to white can I put you,
That.
Right, exactly
that.
And I think that does happen in a different way in the Black community as well. Just a way, colorism is a big issue in the Black community that we have to battle. That is an inner hatred that some people have inside of them, and probably all of us, that we need to deal with. But yeah, you're not Black enough for this community, you're not white enough for this community exists in almost every spectrum of my life. So.
Okay, Leah, so it's no secret that the opera industry has a centuries-long history of blackface, yellowface, brownface, redface, and countless other historically offensive, horrifically racist practices. In fact, the two most common examples involve the two communities we're discussing today, Madame Butterfly and Aida, the latter of which was performed in blackface on a major American stage as recently as 11 months ago. Could you speak to these experiences or ways that Asian people can help empower and amplify Black voices, literally and figuratively, in the opera world?
Yeah. So the issue of blackface and yellowface and such is currently a hot button issue, and perspectives vary, and I think it's important to note that. I found that many Black artists have different views than we might expect. So I think it's important that we remember that everyone doesn't hold the same views when it comes to that. And they're all valid in their own ways. Some of them are trash, I think, personally, but
not going to disagree with that.
But they are valid. But I think when it comes to the issue of coloring one's skin for opera, or being pigeonholed or discriminated against, Black people have often been the point people for that. And we've often been the ones who were tasked with speaking up for everyone and not just Black people. And you see it even now in some of these talks right now. We're speaking about Black lives, but you see Black people and non-Black people, saying, okay, well, people of color, because we can't just focus on our issue. We have to include everyone else. And I think that's just a part of our experience, is that we want everyone to feel included because we know what it's like to not be included. So I personally would love to see more Asian people stand up in the same way that Black people stand up for them. I know that we in our communities, we speak up for our individual selves. We speak up for Black people. And Asians speak up for Asians, and they speak about these issues amongst each other. But I would love to see that dialogue. I would just love to see us speak up for each other. I would love to see Asian people speak up for Black people. I would love to see that solidarity. And not to get off track, but I'm from Philadelphia. And so Chinese restaurants and Asian-owned beauty supply stores and nail salons are woven into the fabric of the Black community. They've always been there as far as I remember. But I don't often see those very same people standing up for Black people when they are profiting from those communities. I don't see it. I don't know. It could be happening.
Nope,
I just
don't
haven't
see it.
seen it.
I definitely don't see it.
Have not seen it. So I would love to see that change, and I would love to see that addressed, and I would love people to admit some of their bias and admit some of that, and call out those family members that own those businesses who have some of those practices, and have things locked up. Liquor stores in Harlem, when I lived in Harlem, had the alcohol completely locked up. You couldn't touch it. And so you had to go to them to the window to let them take it out.
I actually wanted to address something Leah said earlier about Asian and Black communities kind of living together in this like really interesting symbiotic way where immigrant, like in my world, it's usually South Korean people. So it's like, because I'm from New York, and I think there are certain communities in Brooklyn where it's mostly just like South Korean, and like those communities coming into Black communities, making money off of the Black communities, profiting off of the Black communities, but also being really racist at the same time. So it's really interesting. I think it's a unique experience that Black people have, where you go to do laundry, where you go to get your nails done, or where you go to buy like the things that you need in your house, are all owned by people who distrust you and are violently racist towards you. Like to have the experience of going to buy your groceries and being like, this shit is gonna be weird for me today because that guy always looks at me funny when I enter the store. That is such a huge part of just being Black. But to what we were saying also about, this is another point that I thought of as Helen was speaking, just how essential it is to white supremacy for people who are discriminated against not to stand together.
Yep.
Because like,
yep.
Obviously, like holding on to each other makes a more stable body. And like, if you can't look at the experience that we had with the coronavirus, how Chinatown in New York City was totally vacated. Like, it took for all that Asian people have brought to New York City, it took so little time for people to distrust that those businesses were going to be safe. Like
Overnight?
It took so little time for people to stop eating in Chinatown.
Literally the second Trump tweeted the Chinese virus, people were like, nope, bye.
So it's really interesting that you can watch that happen, and then a few weeks later, watch all these Black people being killed by the police while we're having a pandemic, and think that those events are not linked, that they don't point to some feature within whiteness. Like, to be under that kind of delusion.
That's a good delusion. Okay, Jeremy, did you want to respond to Leah and Mimi and Alice and Helen and just add to this conversation? I know you sent me a lot of resources about your research about Asian anti-Blackness and about Asian and Black demographics and opera. So please share whatever you wish.
I'm happy to share that. Hopefully that will come up later. I just wanted to piggyback on,
Sure.
First of all, the yellowface and the blackface. I also feel kind of conflicted. While I'm not Black and I see yellowface on the stage, it's a different history. We didn't have that kind of minstrelism for Asian people, as far as I'm aware, or at least not to the same extent.
Not to the same extent. I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Yes, maybe there is some of that. Yeah, maybe there. I'm sure there are, but not that I can immediately name. And so for me, the issue of the yellowface, it's more offensive in the imbalance of casting, in that it shows the structural. I think what's a key term that's emerged in the recent weeks is redefining racism, where I think Merriam-Webster just updated their definition of racism. It's not just one race thinking they're superior than the other. It's also about the structural racism. And to me, the yellowface and the blackface, it's just a symptom of structural racism, keeping people of color from being cast in the first place. Sure, I don't think there's any problem, when the reverse is true, an Asian person plays a white person on stage, whatever, this is acting. This is part of the theater, the suspension of belief. But when you consistently have, 99 Turin dots, and the numbers just, it doesn't make sense that you have Asian people that can sing the role, but it's frequently non-Asian people singing, or you have, Othello's, whatever character, like a Black character, an Asian character. I think that to me is more hurtful than the actual act of seeing someone in the face.
I literally couldn't agree more. And Jeremy, I don't know if I wrote this to you in our contact emails, but my dissertation is actually on that, on color conscious casting and history of blackface and yellowface and stuff like that. So it seems like we have a lot of overlapping interests. But I think the interesting thing is that there are really so few. I mean, we've named them almost all of them basically in this panel, Madame Butterfly, Aida, Othello, that are really specific, that are really like race, ethnicity specific. And people will claim, oh, well, Othello is for a large dramatic tenor and we can't find a person of African descent to sing it. Bullshit.
No.
Freaking bullshit. Okay, look, maybe and the four of us were talking about this, maybe at Wyoming community opera, you can't find a person of African descent to do it. Fine, okay. At the freaking Metropolitan Opera, literally the performing arts organization in the world that has the largest budget in the entire world, you can find a freaking dramatic tenor of African descent to sing Othello, period. You just can't.
And also on the issue, a frequent excuse is we cast by the voice. And that's, that is you cannot, I don't think you can no longer say that anymore. You can cast by the voice when you have these blatant statistics.
I mean, you can cast by the voice when you're doing Così fan tutte or you know, like basically any freaking piece that isn't like one of those five or that isn't freaking Porgy and Bess at what is it, Hungarian State Opera? Leah, that's the
yes.
yeah, okay, I'm gonna add Hungarian State Opera in the I'm gonna do a little pop-up in the video edit because fuck you. Like
I think related to selling tickets as well, there's this idea that a person of color, a leading man, a leading Asian man, a leading Black female is not going to sell tickets. And that, I think that, maybe I'm just putting words in their mouth, but I'm sure that's another reason why they keep the colored, I don't like saying colored people because I don't ever refer to myself as that, but like they keep, you know, these roles cast, they keep casting white people in these roles.
I'm sorry, but if any performing arts organization is more concerned with their ticket sales than diversity and equality and representation, they won't be getting my money in the future. So
Jeremy pretty much said what I was thinking, but I wanted to add that it is certainly more hurtful that we're not seeing a more wide variety of roles go to people who are Black or Asian. We're seeing us put into those certain roles and seen in a certain kind of way. So it's less hurtful to see the yellowface and blackface. Like he said, it's an outcome of that. But it's more hurtful that we're not seeing us in certain roles. Like they see Asian sopranos singing these Inas and Etas, even if their voices are a little fuller. I had a colleague recently who kept being forced into this light lyric stuff because she's a thin Chinese soprano, but her voice is fuller and she should be singing more lyric roles. So I think for many of us, it's less an issue of this person being painted and more, why do we need people who have to be painted? Why can't we?
We don't. We don't. We don't. There's no. If you think any you know, race-based makeup has a place in on stages here in America and around the world in 2020, you can just click that shut off the video now. Just leave. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's such a strange way to look at roles in general. I think with the state of opera being what it is, the fact that we have to clamor to perform our race, to perform like some white person's vision of what an Asian person or a Black person is supposed to act like, that is so crazy to me. I feel like if you're blessed enough to have an artist of color come to your organization, then you are then given the opportunity to do something interesting with that artist, to change your production, to make a compelling story happen. I don't understand why it's not even working. The audience is literally dying. What we're doing right now isn't working.
Literally.
And yet we're so attached to it.
Ling Ling. So it's no secret that the orchestra world has a centuries-long history of racism, but it actually has even lower Black representation than opera does. I looked at a study from the League of American Orchestras conducted in 2016 that found only 2.5% of orchestral musicians in smaller American orchestras, which is budget groups 4 through 8, and 1.2% in larger orchestras, which is budget groups 1 through 3, were Black, compared to 8.8% in smaller orchestras and slightly, though notably higher, 9.3% in larger American orchestras for Asians. Could you speak to your experience with this? What ways can Asian orchestral musicians and really the Asian community as a whole better support Black musicians in our industry?
My experience of those statistics is that, if anything, I'm surprised by how high they are compared to the orchestras that I've played in. I played with Baltimore, New York Phil, Houston Grand Opera. I did the Ring Cycle there, Houston Symphony. And of all the orchestras I've played with, I think maybe like a little more than one hand, I can say the number of Black people that I've had the opportunity to collaborate.
Wow.
And it's really sad. One of the places I play in the summers is the Grand Teton Music Festival. And I remember, you know, we have like a huge gala every year, and who was it last year? This was like really upsetting, but we had a Black soloist come in for singing, and so I'm getting upset about it, but it's just that Wyoming is such a white place, and this person felt just like in the car ride over, one of the admin told me later that she was just shocked by how white everything was and did not feel comfortable in the space. And then so many musicians were like, she was not very nice. She was kind of standoffish and things like that, just because she was performing, like had just traveled to Wyoming with a newborn and
What?
like one of the whitest spaces ever. And of course she was like, because she wasn't like super cheerful, you know, like was immediately just chat all over. So that was upsetting. And then the marketing, they did tell me, because I was friends with people working in the box office, that it was like a really low week. And that's because most of the people who can afford to go to Jackson Hole for the summer are rich white people who are racist. And so my experience of that is it's bad. Even conservatories, all the conservatories that I've gone to, I mean, Rice, the name is Rice. I mean, that's not super related, but, and Cleveland Institute of Music, all of the Black people I knew were in the opera program, basically at both of those schools. So it's super upsetting. As a freelancer, I don't feel like I have much power because I don't work with an organization. I've been seeing like the Met Opera musicians. I saw their letter.
That was a good letter.
I've seen all these templates come out for how to approach your school, and I'm an alum now. I can join all of these things, but I don't feel like I have much power. But what I can do is, if I'm ever in an opportunity to contract, I can recommend my Black colleagues who are incredible performers and people. I've been a part of Link Up, which is Carnegie Hall's orchestra. That is like an educational program for 3rd to 5th graders. And that's the only orchestra that I've ever been a part of that's been like, we want to reflect the diversity of our audiences, and I've actually tried to do it. And I showed up and I was literally like, what am I doing here? I am not a minority in the classical music world. So, but anyway, I mean, it's something that I want to do. The projects that I choose to do, I'm lucky to work on Forgotten Voices with Kelly Hall Tompkins, an amazing Black violin soloist. And it's a project she's worked on for 15 years. And we go to shelters and play there. But just the problem starts in our education system. It's like all redlining, because having an instrument in the first place when you're a kid, like you have to have excess money to have that. If you want private lessons to get good at that, you need money. Just the way like I saw from my public school, like when I went to middle school and then high school, all of our friend groups split up into different schools, and I didn't really understand what was happening or why that happened. And my school had an arts program and so many did not. So it's just, the problem is systemic, and that's why we don't have a lot of representation in orchestras.
Just to piggyback on Asian people not being a minority, it's interesting how I feel like there's a divide in opera and classical music in general. And for example, like Ling Ling, you were saying all the Black people you knew at Rice, they were in the opera program. What's interesting is that even though singers might be cast of color, singers of color might be cast, and it looks like on stage, oh wow, we have some Black singers, we have this one Asian singer in Nixon in China or whatever. The walls of the opera house are still run by the old school, old white.
Oh, absolutely.
And the people that are filling those walls, the coming in, those people are also largely white and male. I just did a study on young artist pianists who who would go into young artist programs, major young artist programs. Maybe that was a selfish thing for me. I just wanted to see what the layout was, because, you know, you can just kind of see, oh, it's very white, but I just want to see for real, like, am I delusional? And when I did the research, I picked 8 major companies. There were 134 pianists altogether. And I also did this because a lot of pianists end up in these admin roles. You know, they start off as a coach, but then they end up doing the they do artistic administration. And so 0 Black women, 3 Black men, I just have to put this in there because this is where Yellow proudly, I guess. The next underrepresented group is Asian men. So we had 3 Black men, 4 Asian men. Asians in total were 12, I think, or 16 Asian people. And one of the comments I got on Instagram was from a white man who kind of just ignored the data that I said, you know, 3 Black men versus 134 white people. And just went on a tirade about how it's not racist because look at classical music, look at symphony orchestras. There's so many Asian, he used the term oversaturation of Asian and white people in classical music. And it's not a big deal if there are no Black people that shown in this data because they have their own music, which they prefer. I didn't know how to, I responded in the best way that I could. But this
you just don't respond to that. You just block that person and you're like, goodbye.
Well, this is a professional musician. I think this divide of, oh, look, oh, we have Black people on stage. Well, what about in admin? We have Asian people we have like 15 violinists in New York Phil or whatever, 20 violinists. So, well, what about working if you go to the Met? What about the Asian singers? It's not, you can't just say, we have enough Asians here, so we have enough Asians in general. We have enough Black people. We did Porgy and Bess this year, so we're covered for the next 5 years. You know, I think it's very
that's probably what, I'm gonna not name names, but that's probably what a certain head of a certain large opera company has thought. We have done Porgy in the last year, so we're good for the next 5 years. Just gonna say that.
And piggybacking on that, if you are doing Porgy, why don't you try harder to bring in a Black conductor, a Black director, choreographer? It's already written by a white person.
It's already written by a white person who used the N-word like so many times in the original libretto.
I think there's no political will to, you know, there's no political will to change that, you know.
There's no political will in the upper echelons of our business right now, but I feel like all of us, don't we have the will to fucking change that? Right. I hope so. Yeah. Let's just brainstorm for a moment. What can our audience do practically with their own companies, with their employers, with their institutions of higher learning in performing arts to increase diversity and BIPOC representation, and what can Asian people in those hiring positions or staff positions or whatever do in particular? Like any action items that you all have, suggestions, recommendations. I know none of us are, like we're not at the top of the industry, but just throwing,
off the top of my head, I just want to say, like, if ever, we get offers for gigs that we can't do. If ever an Asian person gets an offer for a gig, in an orchestra or in a chamber ensemble or anything, actively recommend a Black singer or a Black player.
Great.
Yes.
Great. That's so fabulous. And I think people who are not in our industry don't realize how often you get a gig like that. If one of your friends turns it down and recommends you, I mean, sometimes that's like half of my work. So
I had a lot of comments, people saying that they've never met a Black pianist before. And I'm, I think I know the same 2 Black pianists that Leah does. But they're not of my generation. Well, maybe one is, but the other one.
Are we talking about Kevin?
Kevin Miller and
Yeah.
Howard Hawkins. You know, Howard Hawkins was I
Oh,
studied with him, you know. So where in my generation, or when I went to school, I can't see anybody. In the collaborative piano blog that I posted, I had numerous people say, I've never even met someone and I've done 3 degrees. So it points to more systemic issues,
yeah.
you know, and it's not just that they don't exist, it's why they don't exist.
Yes.
Why aren't they in there? You know, and that's the bigger picture.
Does anyone have suggestions on how we can
Yeah.
help them exist, how we can create
I
them?
definitely do, because I feel like when we talk about diversity, we are taught, our expectation is that we walk into the room and it magically appears before us. But we know that we live in a pretty segregated society. And so when we talk about diversity, you have to work hard. I mean, you have to work for it. So when you're working in these really white spaces, how do you expect that diversity is just going to fall into your lap? It's not a given. You have to work for it. You have to expand your circles actively, and you have to find Black people to be on your board. Black people know other Black people, like usually. So you have to put some Black people on your board. Also, when you think about anything that affects an artist financially will affect Black artists disproportionately. So we're talking about something like this season that we're going through. We need to be able to like financially back up Black artists so that they can sustain themselves through this season in a way that like a lot of people just won't get. For every like one person that gets recognition, there are so many people who don't, because they don't have access to support, even though they're ready, they're scrappy, and they have everything that it takes. They need to be pushed in a certain way.
Could not agree more.
And I think something that Ling Ling brought up was that it is a point of privilege to own an instrument, especially as a child, and in certain communities that isn't a given. Personally, growing up in Chicago, I was only able to attain my first instrument, which was a flute, through a program that we're donating it to us and to underprivileged youth. And so I think to encourage the audience and people here, if you have a chance to donate those things that are going to help someone get ahead, or going to help them, understand a new musical language, donate, help those communities as much as possible.
So obviously the jazz world has far, far more Black voices in it, again, both literally and figuratively, likely because jazz really was birthed out of Black American music. And so could you speak to your experience as a Black musician in classical industry, opera, jazz, etc., and your treatment by Asian community in classical music, your treatment by, the very, very few people, Asian people in jazz, and just kind of that whole duality, I guess?
Well, okay. Unfortunately, I have to say that I don't believe jazz is a Black art form anymore. I think it was born out of Blackness, and it wouldn't exist without Blackness. And so the dream and the hope is that that it's still Black, but it's unfortunately it's really rare that I get to play with a Black band. My band right now is like me and a set of identical twins, the Pod Brothers, who are both 2 white dudes from Vermont. And we try, we work to get more people of color to be in our band, like when we expand beyond our trio all the time. But Black culture, the moment Black culture is co-opted, it changes. So, I mean, Black people were making jazz, and it was freaking dope back in the day. White people started to be like, oh, I'm cool, I could do this too. Jazz gets brought into conservatories. Jazz becomes about virtuosity and not the Black experience. A lot of jazz musicians, a majority of whom are white, feel offended at the idea that people tell them that they can't play jazz because of their race. And I think it's much deeper than that. Like the second you start playing jazz, it ceases to be jazz, actually. You can't perform Black pain. It's not yours to perform. And you can't perform Black joy. You just don't get to. You got some other dope shit. You know what I'm saying? I love Verdi, but like you don't get jazz. Just like I can't go and play a Viennese waltz, no matter how much I try. To think that you're gonna go to school, learn some changes, and to be able to perform an entire culture, that's just not. It's not gonna work like that. So, yes, I don't think jazz is Black.
All right, Jeremy, so if people couldn't tell by now, you are Australian. I know there's a lot of discrimination against Black Aboriginal people in Australia, and Asian Australians are no exception to this. Have you witnessed this?
So, let me preface this by saying this. There's an American and Australian, Australia is kind of infamous for being racist, but we did not have an African slave trade. Despite that, the narrative is that Australia never had a slave trade, but in researching this topic, I discovered that actually, yes, we did have a slave trade. We enslaved the indigenous people in the same way that white settlers enslaved the indigenous people of America. But what happens, what's sad about indigenous lives, I feel like in both countries, is that they get sidelined, or their populations were decimated or bred out to a point where there's so few that their voices are completely unheard. So when you say Asian Australians are complicit in Black Aboriginal lives, racism, to me, I would just have to mildly agree. I would say yes, in the same way that Leah was saying, there's a racism of omission, complicity that comes with silence. But for example, I have very little, in the same way that an American person has very little to do with Native American issues. It's kind of not in your face. So certainly there are parallels between the Aboriginal Black experience in Australia and the indigenous people of America, as well as African slaves in the Americas. And the legacy of that exists today. We have, an abnormal amount of deaths in custody, alcoholism, drugs, abuse in protected Aboriginal areas. We had a thing called the stolen generation, where the government actively stole the children of Aboriginal people. So in many ways, Australia is still extremely racist against Asian people in a way that America has kind of progressed. An American has come to progress in a way that Asian people have white privilege. In Australia, we still have exchange students getting shot and murdered, to this day.
Wow.
So and I'm not saying that being discriminated against doesn't make you immune from discriminating against other people. I think it's horrible how the Asian businesses that move into the Black neighborhoods in America are at the same time openly racist and hostile to those, to their own community. But it's just slightly different. So I would say, it's kind of a weird position to be in as an Asian Australian dealing with Black Lives Matter. Right now in New York City, it's very like, I'm really in it. I'm in the thick of it. But if I was back home, I would just be, in my own bubble again.
I have something to say. Just a clarifying point about Black Americans and Native Americans. Native Americans had slaves, and
yes.
There are a bunch of Black people that are Native here. So if you like, especially in the South, especially in New Orleans, there's a lot of representations of just like Black Native culture, like people basically as Black as me wearing like a Native American headdress. I mean, it was slightly different, obviously, when Native Americans had slaves, and the opportunity to integrate into the community was different. But it's just slightly. So like Native American issues are also Black issues because the cultures are intertwined, and they're Black issues because they have to do with the environment, and we all live here. So I mean,
I think definitely addressing implicit biases, and I think holding people in your own communities accountable is really important at this time. Having those conversations and calling people out for things, and educating people to a certain extent. I believe that it isn't everyone's job, of course, but I think, just as Mimi has done here in educating us about Native Americans and their hand in slavery as well. It's these types of conversations that are going to help us create a better understanding of each other and a better existence in this country.
I could not agree more. And I do want to address specifically Asian people and other East Asian people talking with your family about this. This is something that I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. And I think I would like to ask our Asian audience to not focus on Blackness. Focus on Asianness, because if you focus on Blackness and how our Asian community has historically dehumanized them, you are acknowledging and enabling that, in maybe in a very small way. But we need to talk about how anti-Blackness has manifested in Asianness. We don't need to attempt to humanize Blackness. That's there. Black people have been human, and they have empowered themselves for millennia. But if we talk to our Asian parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever, about what in their culture, what in our culture perpetuates anti-Blackness, in my view, that is so much more effective. And if we talk to our Asian relatives about Blackness, it's not effective. We have to talk about them about facing our own anti-Blackness and our own racism that's baked in our cultures. We have to look inward, not outward.
Concluding thought. Well, I thought that this was a really, really interesting and diverse discussion. It went in a lot of different arenas. And I think for those of us who are more musical theater based than opera, I think there is a lot of work to do there as well. I think that more people, especially Black people, there are starting to be more opportunities for us to write in opera. I've been asked about certain projects in that arena as well, and I'm learning, and I think it's important for our voices to be heard and our stories to be shared in that industry as well. Open the door for Black people so that they can open the door for more Black people in all of these industries.
I want to say that I think that we often think of racial issues as against Black people and non-Black people as an American thing. And we don't see it as being a global thing. And I can point to instances, and we all can point to instances where people globally have been affected by these viewpoints. So I just want us to admit our bias and call out those family members, as we've said many times, and just point out that they do have these issues and these issues that are built into them. And then I just want to say also that I read something online that struck me also, that I have never seen an Asian person go into a Black-owned establishment. And I never thought about it. But I haven't seen it.
Wow. I live in New Carrollton, Maryland, for those of you who are familiar with the DMV area, and it's like 65% Black. So most of the restaurants I go to are Black owned. So
I'm so happy to hear that.
I just want to say, Leah, my mom and dad, who are in their 60s and 70s, are often the only non-Black people at their favorite restaurant in Houston called Cool Runnings, which is an amazing Black-owned restaurant. And
can I just say that I'm not saying it's never happened.
Oh, no, absolutely. You're saying you haven't seen it. And to be fair, it's exceedingly rare. I don't think I've seen another Asian person go into a Black-owned restaurant. Like,
yeah, and yeah. Okay, I just want to make sure.
Oh, no, absolutely.
No.
We did not. No.
I just want to tell you that there's like hope. Like, we've been talking about racism for years, my parents and I, and it's especially growing up in a place like Houston, where like I worked in the Third Ward, where George Floyd was from, and you know, but I guess what I want moving forward is like, I want a list of Black names, especially in the New York community, of people that I can recommend for anything that comes up. That's like what I can offer and want to do.
I think there's a couple of points that spring to mind. I just want to also speak a little bit about Asian American, and that, and within that word, we have different levels of privilege. So I just want to point out that 1 in 7 undocumented immigrants are Asian, and they certainly don't share the same white privilege and the same privileges that someone, a second generation, Asian American might have. The other thing is, I just to end on, I want to say that white supremacy, it doesn't discriminate. It's kind of just this silent force everywhere. It affects, Asians, Blacks, and I just want to bring up the fact that, in the LA riots, while South Korean racism against Black people, that's certainly a motivator behind the riots. Don't forget that the police abandoned them. So we have the same enemy. And so at the same time, being discriminated against is not a badge for you to discriminate against other people. It doesn't make you can't use that and justify your own discrimination. So, a couple of posts that I've been seeing right now are people saying, oh, I'm afraid to speak out. I'm kind of conflicted. I don't know if I call out these companies, am I going to be blacklisted? I think at this time, I kind of just tagged everybody in there, and I just kind of was like, whatever. And one of the companies actually did reach out, and it sounds, they said all the right things. So let's just hope that's one step, that they say the right things, and then, okay.
Do the right things.
Do the right things, yeah.
Yep.
My last thought is simply to dream of something better. Like, within all of us, we have white supremacy to undo. And I want us to get to a point, individually and as a group, where we no longer see ourselves through the lens of white supremacy or even living in opposition to white supremacy, but to see ourselves for who we really are, to give ourselves what we really need. I want us all to get there individually and as a group. And this is something that in a big way, white people are charged with the task of doing, just because they have famously been so good at ignoring it. But I think it's really important, purposeful work for us as a group to start dreaming of something better and to start thinking of how we can change the world of the arts in a really compelling way.
Thank you from the entire Wear Yellow Proudly team to our 5 amazing panelists. This far, far surpassed our expectations for what this would be. Thank you for the extremely quick response that you gave. And We hope that our audience is receptive to all this information. Please read all of the materials that we're going to link in the description, and support our artists and our panelists and the organizations that they support. We'll put all of that information in the description. And thank you very much to everyone. In love, solidarity, and Black Lives Matter forever.